Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to DBR Bites, episode number 161. We are coming to you on Sunday, April 19th, around 11:15 in the morning on the East Coast. And we had a couple of things we wanted to talk about, but we just got some breaking news, so we're going to talk about that first. Before I do that, I'm Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. I have Jason with me. Jason's going to be with us for the first half of this episode. Jason is at the airport. Heading home after a weekend away from Atlanta. But Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Donald. We got some really, really good news. I wasn't going to be on this episode. I'll be honest with you. It's kind of, we were sitting in an airport. It's kind of easier not to do this, but we got the news that I was like, yeah, I got to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have Scott Rich with us. Scott, hello, good morning.
It's always fun when the plan is, hey, Scott's gonna pinch hit, and then something happens. This is like the third or fourth time I feel like that's happened. We're like, oh no, we got to get everyone in. Big news.
To be fair, this was going to be recorded like 15 minutes prior because my
Thank goodness
computer
your
was being
computer
wonky.
had some trouble booting up.
Yes, my computer had trouble, but because of that, it allowed for this breaking news to come through, and that is Drew Sernowski, the Belmont 6'9", 230-pound transfer, has committed to Duke. He averaged 10.7 points per game last year, also 6.0 rebounds, 2.6 assists per game, and 1.3 blocks in just 21.8 minutes per game. You know who that sounds like? It sounds like a Malik Brown replacement, Jason.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. This guy is he's uh, he's 6'9", but he's a guy who plays close to the basket. He's not by any stretch is this guy a stretch four. We'll get into the shortcomings in his game, including free throws and shooting the ball from anything outside of about 6 feet from the basket. but put my man in the post. He can dunk. He dunks a lot. He's very athletic. I'm going to go ahead and say I sort of said to some people, I was like, oh, hey, poor man's Ryan Young kind of thing.
I
Not
was
at
wondering
all.
if you were
Not
going to admit that live on the
now.
pod.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So here I am admitting, no, not in no way a similar player to Ryan Young or even to Theo John. Two recent transfers that Duke got, who I think are going to play. He's going to play a similar role to those guys, sort of be the backup center. He's very, very athletic, very bouncy, very long as well. And that's why I think the Malik Brown comparisons make a lot more sense. This guy's also just a lot of the stuff that you don't think about a lot in terms of what you're going to get out of a backup center, out of a post player. This guy does those things really well. And by that, I mean, not necessarily scoring, but stuff like his offensive rebounding rate. Scott, I know you love the analytics as much as I do. Dude had a top 100 offensive rebounding rate in all of college basketball. He's just a beast on the boards. His block rate, Donald, you mentioned 1.3 blocks per game. His block rate was top 50 in all of college basketball. Now, I'm not, I don't know how well those numbers are going to translate against the kind of competition that he's going to face at Duke. I mean, Belmont's Belmont's one of the best mid-majors in the country. This is an excellent, excellent program. But he's stepping up in class in a pretty big way. But even if they don't translate perfectly, you're talking about a guy who is still going to be able to impact rim protection. He's going to run the floor really, really well. He's smart and a good passer, and he's going to be a force on the boards. I'm super excited for John Shire to get a guy like this to come in to be the backup center. Is just it shows you Duke is Duke, and no one recruits like we do.
Yeah, I think there's a certain segment of Duke fans that are probably going to be like, oh, we got a guy from Belmont. We didn't get a big name that we recognize from a power conference school. We're scrimping, we're saving something, something, something. Let's put all that to rest. Transfer portal rankings are dumb except when they're good for us. Transfer portal rankings are good for us when they come to this young man who is ranked in, somewhere in the top 30 around that at a couple of the rankings. ESPN, he's a little bit lower, more in the 80s. But regardless, he's the type of guy who you expect a Power 5 conference team to pay big bucks to come in and start. We're all assuming he's coming in to apprentice behind Pat Gongba for a year, knock on wood that Pat indeed does come back. And then he's a guy who I think we can project as potentially the starting center in his senior year in 2 years at Duke. And the other thing that we need to remember about Belmont is, so much of mid-major basketball has sort of fallen by the wayside as people are sort of hacking the net, is all the stuff about the power conference teams trying to ice out those mid-majors, et cetera, et cetera. Even with all that, Belmont ended the season ranked number 69 in Ken Palm. They played in the Missouri Valley, which is consistently one of the best mid-major leagues, and they won the regular season title. They happened to get, pretty sort of out of the ordinary upset in the beginning of the Missouri Valley tournament that knocked them out, of chances for March. But if they had made it to March Madness, they would have been a really, really trendy upset pick. The last thing I want to say is the analytics. The analytics are basically say that Drew Sernowski was one of, if not the best big men in the Missouri Valley Conference last year. Period. End of sentence. Despite playing only 20-ish minutes a game, he was second in the conference in offensive rebound rate, fifth in the conference in defensive rebound rate, sixth in the conference in assist rate as a big man. That sounds like something that fits John Shire's offense pretty darn well. First in block rate, 20th in steal rate, third in fouls drawn per 40 minutes. Obviously, if he can't make his free throws, that's not as big of a, plus, but there we go. This is a guy that, again, would start for a lot of teams in Power 5 conferences, and by all accounts, he's coming in to be our backup. That's a huge, huge steal. I also think, Jason, because of his length and even though he doesn't shoot well, when you watch his highlights, he moves well. He passes and he does move well out on the perimeter. It would not shock me if he's playing alongside Pat Gongba in certain matchups for 5-ish, 10-ish minutes a game against bigger teams, because at least defensively, he appears to have the quickness and the agility and the length to do that, even if he doesn't have the outside shot to potentially, do that for long stretches offensively.
I will also say, to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying about mid-major players and their ability to be dominant or at least be effective in a power conference. Just take a look at the Sweet 16. Like 90% of the teams had players from that had been transferred in from a mid-major into their program and it was one of their best players, one of their starters. You could see all the different schools and where everyone came from. Sure, Duke was very rare in that we had, three guys, at least this past year, that stayed at Duke. But you also had just a bunch of transfers from everywhere. I mean, obviously Michigan had guys from everywhere. And you see these mid-major players come into the fold at these big programs and still, be able to elevate their game to that level. And so that shouldn't be something that should concern folks. It's funny, Evan Brad's just left Duke to go to Belmont. We get Sernowski in return. I guess that's a trade. I guess we're making trades now in the transfer portal. But it's interesting how that all worked out. And like you guys said, I'm really liking what he could bring to this team. Now, sure, there are some deficiencies, Jason. What are those deficiencies?
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and say two things that should give Duke fans cause for concern. The first one is a number. That number is 43.6%. That is Drew Sernowski's free throw percentage. Again, 43% from the free throw line. And this is a Duke team. Look, obviously the personnel is going to be different next year than it was this past year. But this is a Duke team that has at times struggled with free throw shooting. 43% is huge, huge source for concern. I will say, as a freshman, he was better than that. He was 56%, but 56% is still really, really not good. This is a guy who in his career is a grand total of 1 of 7 at the free throw line. At the 3-point line. 1 of 7 on 3-pointers, so he's not going to stretch the defense at all. The free throw percentages, look, you got to be concerned about that and wonder how much that limits his ability to be on the floor, especially late in games. But then the other thing I'll say, and I mentioned this already, but I want everyone to really, really understand this. He has played 2 years at Belmont. He has not played a single power conference team in those 2 years. Belmont dominates mid-majors. a lot of the power conference teams don't want to schedule, but they want no part of Belmont. Belmont
Mhm.
struggles to find opponents, at the big time level. The best team that he played last year was Northern Iowa, which, a good club, but like we have zero evidence of what Drew Sernowski does against the kind of teams that Duke is literally going to face in 95% of their games. We just don't know. We can guess based on looking at how he's done against lower level teams, but that is one of the big mysteries here. And Donald Scott, we keep it honest here on this podcast. We're not here to glaze guys up and say nothing but good things. I'm thrilled we got this guy. This is in my opinion, this looks like it could be an absolute home run. When you look at the analytics, when you look at the tape, dude looks awesome. But can't shoot free throws. He's not going to shoot three-pointers. And there is a big question mark about the level of competition he's played against until now.
I will say, despite the level of competition, the coaches that he's played against have praise upon praise to heap on this guy. Jeff Goodman from the Field of 68 just posted a anonymous quote from a opposing Missouri Valley Conference coach on Drew Sernowski, who said, and this is quoting from Jeff Goodman, he's different. He plays with a super high motor, good versatility defensively. Good athlete who can switch multiple coverages. He's a really good passer and can face up and play off the bounce. The only question for him is perimeter shooting. That sounds a lot like a guy who fits the John Shire mold. Again, the perimeter shooting is the biggest question mark, but if this is a guy who is playing 10, 15 minutes a game rather than 25, 30 minutes a game, and again, I think potentially apprenticing for that more significant role 2 years down the line, that's a heck of a luxury to have a guy with that scouting report as your backup center.
And I also think for the flaws, right? One, free throws, that's something that can improve. It's not like, well, we're stuck with 43%. As you mentioned, he was Jason, he trended downward a little bit, but like he can go back up. And that's something that, we've seen Duke kind of remake how people shoot at times. And I think they have a great department in that, figuring out how the mechanics of a shot work for a player and how that can be retooled so that he can hit, something from 6 feet or beyond, or go to the charity stripe and hit free throws. Because, of course, people are going to see that number and they're going to say, well, we know who's not getting the ball in crunch time, right? That's going to be something that they'll probably work with him on over the summer, because as a big man in the ACC, and really just in college basketball, hitting free throws is going to be part of that equation. So I'm not too stressed out about him making his free throws just yet, because Jason, as you mentioned, he hasn't made one for Duke yet. So he hasn't attempted one yet. We'll wait until we get to that point on that. And I think the perimeter shooting also will come, because I think teams have the book on him, and Duke is trying to rewrite that with him in a Duke uniform. And I think there's going to be some changes. If you mentioned Malik Brown, like the transformation he had, he went, was this guy who was just all over the place and then became Defensive Player of the Year. Now he had those qualities, but I feel like at Duke he was able to, really maximize his potential and really give us what we needed. So I'm really excited about Drew Sernowski and really looking forward to seeing him in a Duke uniform. I want to shift to another guy who will be in a Duke uniform next year, who we are glad to see back in the blue and white, and that is Kaden Boozer. A couple days ago, he announced that he was returning for his sophomore year. Of course, Kaden Boozer will be in the talks to probably be the starting point guard, or if not one of the starting guards in the lineup next season for the Blue Devils. Jason, your thoughts on Kaden coming back to Durham?
I mean, I don't know how, as a Duke fan, you could be anything but absolutely thrilled to hear about this. Cayden down the stretch was, just outrageously good. When he, starting with when he had to take over when Caleb Foster got hurt against Carolina, Kaden Boozer showed he showed that he can be an absolutely lethal guard in terms of taking the ball to the basket. He showed that he can rack up assists and really, run the club. He was excellent. He was outstanding, and you have to project, really nice growth for him from his freshman to his sophomore season. let me put it this way. Had Kaden Boozer entered the transfer portal, I think probably he would have been, top 20 or so in the portal, maybe even higher than that. So, for people who are obsessing over the portal and the such, Duke just signed one of the top one of the top point guards in the portal for sure. And continuity. One of the things that we haven't heard yet about the rest of Duke's roster. Duke has been very slow to announce things. Cayden is the first domino, but I think all expectations are that he's not the last, and that we're going to hear about multiple other guys coming back. John Shire's talked about the most important retention that he does, the most important recruiting that he does in the summer is recruiting guys to come back to Duke. We saw that this past year. It gives you a leg up on everybody else when you have guys back who understand how you play defense, how you play offense, what the expectations are at this program. Cayden, I think, is going to be a leader on this team next season. That's kind of his makeup. And having a year in the program now, he knows what's expected. And if, as we've heard, as we think, Duke brings back, 3, 4, 5 guys or so from last year's team, the advantage that this team is going to have in terms of knowing how to play defense, especially defense, nothing requires as much connectiveness as defense does. The advantage this team's going to have in terms of knowing how to play defense the way John Shire wants them to play defense, which means you're one of the top, 3 defenses in the country. It's huge and super, super exciting if you're a Duke fan. Defense travels. And I think having these guys back, oh God, I'm ready for it now.
Jason, I think you said something really interesting there, which is if Kaden Boozer was a transfer point guard, this would be a big splashy move, right? There's a certain segment of fans that want the move that's going to read well on Instagram and read well on Twitter and all that stuff. So let's just pretend for a second that Kaden Boozer was someone we were bringing back in from the portal, not bringing in retaining, right? If we went out and said, Duke is bringing in from the portal a sophomore point guard who is a consensus 5-star recruit in the loaded 2026 freshman class, who averaged 13 points and 3.5 assists over his last 7 games of the year when he came in as a starter, after averaging about 7 points per game off the bench. You would say, hell yeah, that's a huge program-defining, winning the summer type move, right? And just because we are keeping that guy, it's even more important. It doesn't splash. It doesn't make the news on ESPN or on Twitter and whatnot. But those are the type of moves that are extra important. They're exponentially more powerful in building your program because that's the guy who did all those things and he's staying in your program, like you said, to maintain that continuity. The fact that we have Kaden Boozer coming back, especially given what he showed down the stretch when he played when Caleb Foster was hurt, is just adds so much upside to this team for the fall.
I echo what you both have said. I will add that the fact remains, at least for me, and you can disagree with this, but we don't get as far as we do in the NCAA tournament or the ACC tournament without Kaden Boozer emerging into the player that he was down the stretch. There was a huge hole when Caleb Foster went down. There was a huge hole, obviously, when Pat went down. And for him to be able to step up and not just provide scoring, but provide assists, provide leadership, provide defense that, wasn't his strong suit, to be clear, during the season. It wasn't like he was the best defender that we had, but he stepped up in those departments. And because of that, Duke got an ACC title, got an ACC tournament title, and they were, we don't have to talk about how close they were to the Final Four. But this was a team that transformed, and he was the guy that helped transform it with his play. And if you just take that last month of play from Kaden Boozer, you have to be nothing but excited about what he can do in year 2. And again, with those extra responsibilities, obviously he's going to improve in certain areas. I think, his shot down the stretch, his 3-point shot he wasn't shooting 50%, but like he was shooting something that made everybody have to come out and check him. And once he did, that opened the floor for him to do what he did best, which is go into the lane and create. He became, and sometimes unstoppable, when he got the ball in going downhill into the lane. You knew it was basically going to come out with a couple of points, whether he got it or he passed it off to somebody who got the 2 points. So I'm really excited to have him back. I wasn't as concerned about him as the other ones, but man, it does feel good to say Kaden Boozer will return for his sophomore year.
Yeah. Hey, and by the way, just because we're talking about, roster kind of stuff and who's going to be here and who's not and all that other kind of things, I do want to point out to everybody tomorrow, Monday, John Blackwell of Wisconsin will be taking an official visit to Duke. He will be on campus. The word is that it's between Duke and Louisville and maybe UCLA. Illinois had very much been in the running for Blackwell, but they brought back somebody. They brought back Andrei Stojakovic, and it kind of, I think the money and the opportunity may not have been there in the same way anymore. So that's a really big, he is a big deal, big time. We've talked about him a little bit. Big time transfer portal guy. Top 3 everywhere. Some people have him number 1. I haven't seen him lower that, I think, than 3, maybe 4 on any of the rankings. Not that these rankings mean all that much.
Unless they're good for us.
Unless they're
right.
Good, yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Well said, Scott. So John Blackwell will be on campus, and, the expectation is that John Shire is going to try and get a commitment right then, right there, when you're visiting. That's the moment. We saw that this weekend with Sernowski visited Duke and committed. So that's how it works here. And we'll see what happens with that. But that could be a pretty significant domino in terms of figuring out what this roster is going to look like for next year, because John Blackwell, as I've said in the past, almost a 20-point per game scorer in the Big Ten, a guy who's a dynamite, absolutely fantastic outside shooter and creators, 3-level scorer. If that guy signs with you, you're penciling him in immediately to be your starting shooting guard, and it creates some situations, and we'll see how those situations work out for the roster. But yeah, that'd be big time, and that may be the next major thing to happen with the Duke roster.
Yeah, we'll keep abreast of that and see. Obviously, let's get him on campus first. We saw a couple weeks ago what happens when they cancel at the last minute. So let's get him on campus, and I think once we're on campus, the closer, John Shire, will do his thing, and hopefully we'll see Blackwell commit to Duke in the near future. But let's take a quick break. On the other side, we're going to talk about someone who did not commit to Duke. We're saying bye-bye to Nicamemia in a big way. More after this. We're back. We've lost Jason. Jason has to go catch his flight. So it's Donald, Scott here. And now we get to talk about another guy who's leaving, not this show, but leaving the Brotherhood for another school. And that's Nicamemia. He had committed to the portal. He had declared to the portal a few weeks ago. And we were getting some word of where he might go, maybe out west. There was even some inside talk about maybe he'll stick around if some dominoes fall with Duke and he would return to campus. But instead, he is going to see Scott in Storrs, Connecticut. He has committed to the UConn Huskies. It is the big transfer that a lot of people are upset about. So, Scott, I turn to you, the guy with the who has to deal with this firsthand. Your thoughts on Nick going to the Huskies?
Oh, I know for sure there are a couple of my colleagues who are going to come find me tomorrow to mention this, which will be a fun conversation. I'll say this. I think I was a little bit surprised that Nick's commitment was immediately followed by Braylon Mullins returning to UConn. I thought that Dan Hurley's recruiting pitch to Nick might have been, you want to play at the 3, you want to show those more perimeter skills that you probably won't have as much of an opportunity to at Duke. Come in and slot into the Braylon Mullins role, and we'll showcase you here. That's obviously not what's happening. Instead, the recruiting pitch must have been, come in and slide into the Alex Caravan role as the stretch 4. I think that's very interesting. I think that arguably that's Nick's longer term, position if he wants to have NBA aspirations. So I think obviously what this must have meant was the issue at Duke was not that Nick didn't want to play the four where the most obvious, fit was for him to compete for a starting spot. Maybe it was that Duke has alternative plans, either with some portal guys, with Cam Williams, etc., where those minutes at the four weren't going to be guaranteed. I think that there are some interesting points of comparison with Alex Caravan. I wonder how Nick will stand up to playing defense as a four-man for 30-ish minutes a game. We saw how tough Nicamemia was, but that was something that, over long stretches sometimes could be taken advantage of. But in terms of the offensive side of the ball, running off of screens, taking open threes, that offensive Alex Caravan role, I think he's going to slide right into. So I think this makes a lot of sense for Nick, as much as, and what we'll talk about this, you know, how much Duke fans are a little bit hurt by this decision.
Well, it's funny that he is kind of being projected to be the Alex Caravan replacement at UConn, because I remember at the Sweet 16 when Pat was back, Caleb had just come back. He mentioned how great it was for him to return to his natural position of the three. He said
Yeah.
he didn't really mind play. He said he didn't mind playing a four, but he would much rather play at the three because he felt like he was more effective there. But I will say this: he's a guy that when we recruited him to Duke, he was 6'6". He showed up on campus. He was 6'6". By the time the season started, he was 6'8" and was still growing. I mentioned at the Michigan game, seeing him next to Cam Boozer, who was a legit 6'9". Then you add his hair, and he was eye to eye with him. So like he's still growing, and I wonder if Dan Hurley kind of said, "Hey, look, I know you want to be a three, but your body is telling us that you need to be a four. Like you're growing into that particular role where you can really dominate some fours as you get taller and get stronger." I will transition into saying that, man, could it have been anywhere else but UConn? Like that's the real thing that a lot of people are said about just any place but UConn. And it's funny. One of my friends who's a UConn fan was like, "Who is this Nicamemia guy? Is he any good?" And I could have told him right then. They're like, "Nah, that dude sucks. You don't want him. Like, send him back our way. We'll take him." But I gave him the gist of what kind of player he was and all the attributes that you mentioned. And now they're excited. Now they're thinking about how oh, we just stole another piece of Duke's like heart by taking one of their freshman guards. And I will say I haven't seen this or like seen the video, but a lot of people are up in arms about the video where he kind of says like the blue is bluer on this side or something like that, and everybody's like, "Hold up, bruh. Like you can commit there, but let's not dive full in yet."
Yeah, so there were that Instagram commitment video. There were sort of two lines that rankled Duke fans. One was that UConn was sort of calling Connecticut the basketball capital of the world over and over again. For those who don't know, that is UConn branding. UConn is brands themselves the basketball capital of the world. That's on merch. It's this is a bad equivalency, but that's their equivalent of the brotherhood, right? It's both men's and women's basketball. Connecticut is the basketball capital of the world.
And it's more on the women's side, right? Like the women win like every year, and it's like, oh, but when the men win too, like it's the women are almost given almost every
Yeah.
single year. And then when the men win, you're like, okay, so we're the college basketball capital. So it's really like a men's basketball brand built on the back of the women's team.
Yeah, so that one, no one has reason to get up in arms about. That is a branding, that is a marketing thing that the average Duke fan just isn't aware of. That's fine. The thing about going to a bluest of blue, a bluer blood, I think was the line. Yeah, I watched that video and that sort of seemed like a low blow walking out that you maybe didn't have to make. But here's the thing. We don't know if Nick wrote that or not. We don't know how much, he was involved in that. In the world of NIL, when you need to have a social media presence to maximize that, maybe this was UConn saying, "Hey, in order to get you these NIL deals, blah, 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 we want you to make a big splashy announcement." I hope that Duke fans don't read too much into that. There's a difference between hating UConn and hating Nicamemia. And I want to say a little bit of something on that front, which is this is the arguably the transfer that is going to sting the most for Duke fans in this modern era of lots of transfers, and that makes a lot of sense. But there are a couple of things to note here. Number one is this is not like a kid going to UNC from Duke. The UConn Duke rivalry goes and fits in spurts, and obviously it's in a major spurt right now. But the average Duke fan doesn't realize that, like, since 2004, the rivalry was sort of in a bit of a lull between Duke and UConn, and we didn't like UConn, and they were another program that we didn't want seeing as many national titles as we did. But kids don't grow up knowing that, especially kids of that generation, I don't think grow up knowing that there is Duke UConn hatred the way that kids grow up knowing that there is Duke UNC hatred or even, Duke other ACC school rivalry. So I don't think that that in and of itself is as much of a slap in the face to Duke in probably the eyes of Nicamemia that Duke fans think it is. The other thing is, I really hope that Duke fans recognize that Nicamemia did everything right in his year wearing a Duke uniform. He gave his blood, sweat, and tears, oftentimes literally, for this team. He took on multiple different roles throughout the year. His playing time fluctuated, and he always came out playing at 110%. He's a guy who we don't win the ACC tournament without Nicamemia, period, full stop. We maybe don't even make it to the Elite Eight without Nicamemia, given what he had to do and the different role he had to take on with Pat Gongba's injury. So there's a difference between being mad that Nick is leaving and being sort of, upset that he's going to UConn and no longer rooting for Nicamemia like we root for some of our other transfers when they go to schools that we don't have a distaste for, and saying, oh, I hate Nicamemia now, I wish ill upon him. I don't think we should ever be wishing ill upon someone who wore Duke across their chest and represented that well. And Nicamemia did that. This is the state of college basketball right now. And I really hope that once the sting wears off, the Duke fans sort of are able to separate those distinct thoughts in their mind. The disappointment of where he's going and how that stings, but also the appreciation for what he did in his year wearing a Duke uniform.
I think you're right? It's different if you're talking about, I mean, look, if if someone transferred from Duke to UNC or vice versa, like that fan base is just going to just burn them in effigy, right? Like that's something that we're just not ready for. But like we recruit the same guys, right? Duke and UConn, Duke and Kentucky, right? If someone transfers to Kentucky, it would be a little bit more stingful in the sense that history has kind of prolonged itself over the years with the Champions Classic, and every couple years we have to see them, right? So that, because you would immediately have that, oh, that guy's on the other team now. We may not see, unless this, oft rumored, never finalized home and home deal gets set up between Duke and UConn. We may not see him next year play, right? He may not play. They play similar teams, but we don't usually end up in the same gym against each other unless it's in the NCAA tournament. And we hate when those things happen because pain has ensued for those. But I think for Nick, I think it was the sting of, similar to a Kevin Durant, right? Going to the team that beat you in such heartbreaking fashion. That's where a lot of people kind of went, oh, come on, man. Like, it's not that if you can't beat them, join them. Like, that's cool for Looney Tunes, but that's not the NIL way, or at least the college basketball way. But I will say this, yes, the NIL world, this will happen more and more, especially again. We are all going after the same guys, the same top recruits, the same top portal guys. This is going to be something that happens again. So I guess we have the initial sting of seeing someone go to a team that you hate and trying to wish them well. I know you have to. You might see him on campus, but it might be out of sight, out of mind for a little bit for me personally, because again, unless we play them, it's not like I'm turning on the TV to watch a lot of UConn games.
Yeah, and it does suck. Again, I think everything is different this offseason, given how unprecedented the end of the season was. Like, that's just a reality. this would feel so much different if Duke had even just lost to UConn in the Elite Eight in a normal game under normal circumstances. I'm not sure this would sting as much as it does. So I think that hopefully Duke fans in a few months will sort of recognize that we're all raw right now. We're going to be raw for a little bit, and everything is going to sting and hurt and tug at our heartstrings a little bit more, considering that. But again, the reality of the modern college basketball game is we're going to be going after top high school guys every single year. And those
Hmm.
top high school guys are going to be the same guys that every other blue blood program is going to be going after. And if things don't work out in a Duke uniform, or even if they do work out, but one of these blue blood programs can say, hey, you're going to be a six man at Duke, you're going to start here. This is the modern game, right? We're inevitably, the reverse will happen. Duke will get a guy that leaves Kentucky, that leaves Kansas, that leaves UConn, that leaves Michigan, that leaves Purdue, that leaves Indiana, because we can offer them a different role. We project them differently. We have a bigger budget. It is going to happen over the long term. It's hard to see that long term given the short term pain that we're all in right now and how this reopens those wounds that, maybe we're just starting to crust over in the scabs for some of us. But again, everything that John Shire has done has always had a counter move. And
Hmm.
we've seen that season after season after season. The fact that Nicamemia felt that he could start and have a bigger role at UConn, but wasn't going to have that at Duke, probably means that something good is in the cards. That means that John really thinks he's going to come in and blow the roof off as a freshman. That means that there's a bigger name transfer guy than that is waiting in the wings, that is is potentially going to come in and takes Nick's minutes. Don't judge things based off of just seeing the blueprint. We have to see the house get built. And the house is nowhere near built right now. There are moves and there are counter moves that still are to come. And so don't judge this Nick Nicamemia decision in isolation until we see what happens a week from now, 2 weeks from now, etc.
And I don't need to remind you this, but I'll remind everyone of this fact. Terrace Reed spent 4 years at Michigan and UConn. In his 4 years, Michigan and UConn combined for 3 national championships, and Terrace Reed won 0 of them. This is just sometimes how it works.
The grass is not always greener.
Correct. And again, we go back to the case in point of even closer to home of Jeremy Roach, right? The fact that it felt like he didn't want to leave, but he ended up doing it. He ends up losing in kind of a storybook weird ending by losing to Duke in the tournament. So I will say we wish him,
we don't wish him well.
Success,
we wish him
success
health and happiness after his college basketball career is over.
Well, health is one thing. I will never
yes.
want him to get hurt, but we'll wish him health, and we'll see him when we see him, if we see him. So that will do it for this episode of DBR Bites. Scott, thank you for joining me for this full episode. Jason is probably boarding his plane right now to fly back to Atlanta, and we will be back as soon as we get any more news. I'm checking right now. There has been no other commitments this morning. It's
going to come fast over these next couple of days.
Yeah, I feel like this week, just a hunch, I feel like this week is going to be pretty busy and active with regards to Duke announcements. So we will be back to recap all of them. But until then, here's the Duke Band. Play us out and take us home.